Okay, well, we're 1 o'clock, and we'll go ahead and get started here, and maybe have a few more folks join us as we go along here. A little bit different format this month. You don't have the pleasure of listening to our moderator greet you. Megan Shargorotsky is unavailable today. And so we went through a little quick training to hopefully get me up to speed to be able to run the show here today. So I'd like to welcome everyone to this month's webinar here on April 1st, a sunny day, cool day, and opening day for the Major League Baseball season. So maybe another sign that we're on the way back to a little bit of normality here going forward. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm Stuart Foster, and I think you all know, serve as state climatologist and director of the Kentucky Climate Center, and I'll be one of the presenters. And then my good friend Matt Dixon there at the University of Kentucky Ag Weather Center will be joining us to give us some updates on the agricultural sector and a few things going on here, especially with the cold weather that we're having right now, such. So with that, let's go ahead and start. Some general information for us. We've been doing these webinars now for, at least a year and a half, for close to 2 years. Thanks to support from the National Integrated Drought Information System and the Midwest Drought Early Warning System. And we work, of course, very closely with the UK Ag Weather Center, Kentucky Division of Water, and a number of other agencies, USGS, National Weather Service, and others that provide information that we utilize on the webinar. And if you're representing another agency here at the state or federal level and would like to be able to participate and contribute, we would love to add more information and more perspective to our webinars. So our next webinar will be the first Thursday in May, which occurs on the 6th. And this webinar, as a reminder, as past ones, will be recorded and should be available for viewing here before too long. Reminder of our Kentucky Drought and Hydrologic Impact Reporter there. And also, and we've been a little bit late getting this advertised, but we have a workshop, online workshop that starts on Tuesday. It's going to just be for a couple hours Tuesday morning and then a week from Tuesday. And the purpose is to give everybody an update, an overview of some drought tools that we have available to us now. That includes the drought dashboard that we developed in conjunction with this NIDIS project for Kentucky. It also includes the USGS Water Science Center's drought dashboard for Kentucky, and the work from the Kentucky Division of Water, Chip Zimmer's focus on drought impact reporting and monitoring, so forth. So really gets an introduction into some tools that are available for you to be able to use, and then have a number of other presentations around the topic of drought and drought management, response, mitigation, so forth. So please join us for that next week. So today we'll again go through recent conditions, talk about impacts, go into some outlooks now that we're getting into the spring season, wrap it up, and then have a little bit of time for questions. So on the left side, we've got a couple photos from one of our newer camera sites there in Bath County. And really just trying to highlight the beginning of March to the end of the March, that we're into the time of year now where we're starting to see a little bit of green up in pastures, and lawns are turning green. I've already had to mow a couple times down here in the southern part of the state. So spring has sprung with just a short deviation here for a day or two. Before we get into the regular set of slides, I put this slide together, and this comes from our drought dashboard that we developed. I selected some stations that were located really in the swath of some of the heaviest precipitation from the storms that produced the flooding at the end of February. So you'll recall it was the 26th through the 28th. What I really wanted to highlight was that we were fortunate, as bad as the flooding was, once we got through the 28th, we went for an extended period without any precipitation across the state. And again, this just focuses in on one of those core areas. But that was really important in terms of allowing some of those floodwaters to recede and work their way down through the river system. And while we had some significant flooding and devastating flooding in some communities, particularly in the eastern part of the state, things could have been worse if we would have followed up that event with additional rains in the following days. So there was a little bit of a silver lining to that event. The last 30 days, precipitation totals across the state, a little bit lower in the north, up around Cincinnati and the northeast, totals in the 2.5 to 3+ inch range in that area. As you go to the south and the southeast and the southwestern part of the state, both areas where you had some locations with 6, 7, 8 inches or more of precipitation, and then large portion of the state in the 4 to 5, 6 inches of precipitation. So again, a pretty wet period there over the last 30 days on top of all the rain that came at the end of February, but with a bit of a break in there again at the first part of the month. So a lot of that rainfall came in the last 2/3 of March. You can see that to our south, there were heavier amounts according to the radar estimates. So we were somewhat fortunate there. Over the last 60 days, now we're looking at some heavier totals in southeastern Kentucky, as much as 17 inches, but many locations over 10 inches there. Likewise, to the southwest, locations with 12 up to 14 inches, a little bit less as you go north, and that's sort of the driest area up in the northern part of the state. You'll notice that there is a bit of divergence here between the measured values from the Kentucky Mesonet stations and some of the radar estimates here. So that's something we need to go back and take a closer look at and see if we can kind of figure that out a little bit more. Usually they're pretty close. And this is for a 90-day period. And you see, again, across the southern part of the state, much more precipitation, and down into the southeastern Kentucky, a little bit less as we move farther to the north statewide. And beyond the state, if you looked at south to Tennessee and then north to Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois, you see that that's a continuation of that pattern where it's quite a bit drier to the north and wetter to the south. If we put that in perspective of what's normal for this time of year, based strictly on the radar precipitation estimates, the last 30 days, precipitation was highly variable across the state. You can see in the upper left areas, a lot of orange or kind of brown and yellow shades, which are below normal. The kind of brownish areas are anywhere 50 to 75% of normal. So that's a very noticeable deficit per se. And if you look to the southeast and the southwest, and then one area up there between Owensboro and Louisville, you see areas that were extremely wet, where we were 150 to near 200% of normal precipitation. So quite variable depending on where you were across the state. When you look at the 60 and the 90-day maps, they're pretty similar in terms of the picture there. And the picture is that most of the state has been well above normal in terms of precipitation totals. And it's probably worth noting, and especially in the context of the flooding that we had, that the areas with the highest precipitation totals and the largest percentage anomalies are generally in the southeastern part of the Kentucky and in the upper portions of our major river watersheds. So a lot of recharge into those areas of the state. There is one interesting thing. If you are located in a small area of Kentucky, basically Crittenden, Union, Webster County, they're in the lower Ohio Valley. There's an area that if you look at the 30-day map, the 60-day map, or the 90-day map, an area that has been consistently below normal precipitation-wise in all of those periods, kind of stands out, surrounded by areas that have been above normal precipitation. So there are some patches of dryness. Another small one is the northern tier of counties in the Cincinnati metropolitan area. There are some areas that have missed out on the heaviest rains and are actually a little bit drier than normal over this, coming out of the winter period here and going into spring. Temperature-wise, you may recall that last month we were well below normal in terms of temperature, and that situation changed dramatically here into March. We were well above normal in terms of our high temperatures. Most areas somewhere between 5 to 7 degrees above normal. On the high temperatures, the low temperatures were also above normal, but not quite as much as the high temperatures. Anyway, that helped a little bit with drying and getting some of this water out of the environment a little bit. But of course, we're still not seeing high temperatures with high rates of evapotranspiration at this time of year. If we look at soil moisture and groundwater, both images here, two different measures, they both show wetness in Kentucky, very much consistent with the precipitation patterns that we've seen. And soil moisture from selected Kentucky mesonet stations. Crittenden County, that's one of those little dry area up there. Nonetheless, we see soil moisture in a very healthy pattern there. And again, that really kind of highlights that even when you have dry weather, during the winter months, it doesn't cause too much of an issue because there's not much moisture being extracted out of the environment. In the upper right, we're looking at Madison County over around Richmond. In the lower left, we're in Todd County down along the Tennessee border. And then in Cumberland County, a little bit farther east, down on the Tennessee border. And again, in all cases, we see pretty much a flat line across the last several months, suggesting that soil moisture has kind of reached a peak and is kind of hanging in there before we get into the warm season of the year. We'll bring back the EDI, Evaporative Demand Drought Index, now that we're getting into the warm season of the year. Again, this is a measure of the atmospheric thirst or demand for water based on temperature, wind, solar radiation. How much moisture would the atmosphere extract if it's available to take from the earth? And you can see, again, at this time, we're just looking at March, the last week on the left and the last month on the right. So we don't have hot conditions by any means, and these values aren't particularly critical right now. And an example of that, on the left side, you see the 1 week eddy, not so much for Kentucky, but up around the Great Lakes with some very high values. But again, that's relative to this time of year. So you can have a relatively high rate of evaporative demand in March, but that still doesn't amount to a lot of water being extracted. So you have to really kind of look at those in a seasonal context. 7-day stream flow averages. Generally, we've got above normal, much above normal stream flows across much of the state, particularly in the southeastern part of the state. Some areas that are closer to normal in the lower portions of some of the watersheds now as the floodwaters have receded and such. And recent rains have brought water levels back higher in some areas of the state, again, that were impacted more by the precipitation over the last 30 days, the areas to the north being a little bit drier. And 28-day stream flows, again, still a few streams there that have been in a much above normal category, averaged over that longer time period. So, you know, that becomes significant when you're looking at a 28-day average. But again, very much consistent with what we saw in looking at the precipitation maps. Current flooding conditions across the state, for the most part, no real concerns. Some very minor flooding there on the Green River, but otherwise, you know, a few stages that are near flood stage around the state. No major issues at this point. So now the U.S. Drought Monitor, I like the look of it from a Kentucky-centric perspective. You see Kentucky, and we're clean as can be with no drought indication anywhere, and we're pretty much in the center of a zone where there's really no drought around. We do continue to see large areas of extreme and exceptional drought in the west, and some dryness that we're paying attention to in the eastern part of the U.S., but pretty far removed from Kentucky at this point. So this is certainly a way we'd like to enter the growing season. And looking at drought change over the last 4 weeks, some positive news there in the Great Plains, where there's been a 1 to 2 class or even 3 class improvement with heavy rains and snows in the plains and eastern area of the Rockies. Some degradation of conditions in Texas that we pay attention to, and down in Florida, as well as to our north in Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania, New York there. But again, not much happening in our area right now, and that's fine. It may keep our audience down a little bit for this webinar when there's not much going on, but that's all right. Now moving on to impacts. Okay, this past month was a bit quieter. You may remember the map from last month, and it was covered with symbols, and I think we had some symbols that probably didn't even get plotted because there was so much overlap with things. But this month, again, the first part of the month, as we alluded to earlier, started out and was pretty quiet, not too much going on. You know, there were a couple reports early in the month, but for the most part, the storm reports occurred in 2 periods there, on the 18th and 19th of the month, with some damaging winds, even a couple reports of hail, some localized flash flooding in portions of eastern Kentucky. No major impacts reported from that. And then a period there near the end of the month, the 25th to the 28th, where we had heavy rains and, again, some localized flooding, flash flooding, but just minor impacts in terms of some road closures occurring, maybe some high water around some houses and so forth, but no major flooding with that. Key thing with that was we did have 3 reported documented tornadoes, none of them causing major damage here in the state. The paths were pretty narrow and they weren't on the ground very long. So we were fortunate there. Our neighbors to the south had a much more devastating impact than we did here in Kentucky. So we're very fortunate and thankful for that. And with that, I'm going to send it up the road to Matt and Matt, you can give us an update on what's happening in the agricultural sector and how our weather and climate has been playing a role there.
All right, awesome, Stu. So agriculture was running behind compared to previous years with our cooler February in 2021. As I said last month, this wasn't so much as a bad thing as we didn't see more advanced growth stages in the case of fruit or winter wheat like previous years. Saying that, we saw growth catch up quite a bit in March with above normal temperatures in place, as many across the state have witnessed. And as you said earlier, green up has been in full effect here. So I've, just like you, have mowed my grass twice this year already also. So as I've included in past webinars, here's a look at growing degree day accumulations for Lexington. Again, growing degree days is an index to relate temperature to growth and development of crops and insects. While calculating growing degree days can be done in a number of ways, the most common process is to take the average temperature for the day and subtract a base temperature. This is the minimum temperature required for growth of a particular crop or insect in the way of development. So for a crop like corn, that base temperature is 50, while maybe a pest like alfalfa weevil, which I'll talk about in a second, is 48. So when growing degree days are accumulated over time, the result can be used to estimate crop maturity, insect activity, scouting, timing, insecticide applications, etc. So when the line increases, we associate that with warmer temperatures and ensuing growth. If the average temperature falls equal to or below the base temperature, the line falls flat, indicating a relatively cool period in place. So in this graph, I include the past 5 years worth of data in Lexington. As you can see, our growing degree day accumulations have really increased over the past few weeks and have now caught up to 2019. We are still running behind most of the years you see on this chart, but as you can see, we were running well behind as of the start of March, so we really caught up. With these cold temperatures over the next few days, we'll see that line level out, very similar to what we saw at this time in 2019. So, Stu, if we can go to the next slide, that'd be great.
Yep.
All right, awesome. So in addition to Lexington, I also extracted the data for Bowling Green this month. The trend in the lines is the same, but Bowling Green has accumulated roughly 50 more growing degree days compared to Lexington, and is now exceeding totals that were seen at this time in 2019. Next slide, please. So the accelerated growth over the past few weeks has come to a point where we are starting to talk about detrimental insects and disease. The two more prominent ones at this time of year are alfalfa weevil and fire blight. Looking first at alfalfa weevil, Doctors Rick Besson and Raul Villanueva, both are extension entomologists at UK, stated in a recent article that these warmer temperatures as of late have resulted in the emergence of alfalfa weevil larvae across the state, or especially across southern Kentucky. Now is the time for producers to start scouting fields and preparing insecticide applications. Looking at the map of degree day accumulations from the Ag Weather Center here at UK, it is recommended producers start scouting when 190 degree days are met in your county. Again, this is with a base temperature of growth of 48 degrees. You can see these numbers are now being reached, 190 that is, and exceeded for the southern half of Kentucky. So warmer temperatures next week will likely put the rest of the state in place. So next slide, please. So April and May are typically the months every year when the disease of fire blight becomes a threat to fruit trees across the state. Initial infection starts when apples and pears are in bloom, which is the case now or will soon be the case. Specialists recommend spraying with protectant antibiotics when risk is high. I posted the current map on here now, and as you can see, risk is low to marginal for most of the state now. But that could very well change as we head into April. Growers can access this map on the UK Ag Weather Center page under disease prediction models. All in all, this disease favors temperatures between 65 and 70, high humidity, and wet conditions. So In the picture to the left, you can see apple flowers that were exposed to the disease. So next slide, please. So concern in the short term will be with these freezing temperatures in place. We already had one cold morning as the Kentucky Mesnet showed us lows in the upper 20s to low 30s for most this morning. On the slide, you can see a map of the NWS, National Weather Service, forecast low temperatures tonight across the state. Only rising into the low to middle 40s today and looking at the low to middle 20s for much of the state tonight, even some teens for low-lying and shelter locations. Just to put this into perspective, normal high temperatures for this time of year, the start of April run in the low to middle 60s, while lows are typically in the low 40s. So we are talking temperatures today, tonight, about 15 to 20 degrees below normal for this time of year. This has resulted in freeze warnings being issued across the state. Just a little bit of a background on these freeze warnings. I talked with the National Weather Service during the spring season about the need for frost and freeze headlines as it pertains to ag susceptibility. Only when ag becomes susceptible does the NWS really think about issuing warnings. While it has been a slower start to the growing season in 2021, talking with specialists across the college, especially in horticulture, vegetation has developed enough to where we thought headlines are needed. Next slide, please. So this chart shows different developmental stages for various fruit trees and the associated critical temperatures for flower bud kill. I see Daniel Becker on the call. I talked to him the past couple days. Daniel is an extension fruit and vegetable associate in Princeton, Kentucky, and sent me some info regarding development this morning. From what I'm gathering, the most concern is on peach and pear trees that have entered bloom. As you can see on the chart, 10% bud kill results with temperatures of 27 to 28 degrees and 90% kill for 23 to 24 degrees. Once again, those 10% numbers are in play with this event. Maybe 90% too. Some of the earliest blooming apples and plum trees can also be included. Daniel told me sweet cherries are now in white bud to bloom. Overall, though, one of the more prominent plants at risk is strawberries. Chris Miguel, another extension associate of small fruits in Lexington, stated that many plasticulture strawberries and matted row berries are in bloom across the state. And the critical temperature for those berries would actually be down around 28 degrees. So protection will be a must tonight. If there is good news in the way of fruit trees, a tree can lose a high number of flowers and still have a full crop potential. As Daniel said in his article that he sent me, apple and peach trees can lose 90% of flowers and still produce a full crop. So next slide, please, Stu. So we have to keep in mind that it is likely cooler at the surface for cold crops and strawberries than what is being seen in the NWS forecast. At least one row cover will be needed on strawberries tonight. Chris Miguel even recommended 2 row covers if possible. As Chris stated, a 1.25 ounce row cover provides about 6 to 8 degrees of protection. Some growers may use irrigation. In regards to cold crops and early season vegetables like the kale, cabbage, onions, turnips, asparagus, broccoli, cauliflower, getting tongue twisted here. I talked to Daniel, and you'll still want to offer some protection tonight with temperatures dropping below 26 degrees. So in the end, you're essentially trapping that heat that built up at the surface during the day. Blankets and sheets work too. Keep in mind that this is more of an advective freeze tonight, so winds are staying up. As you can see from the images, you want to make sure that the covers are weighted down on the edges in some way. So fruit trees are a little more difficult to protect, obviously, because of the sheer size, but once again, you can lose quite a few flowers and still produce a full crop. Next slide, please. So looking at climatology, this is not completely out of the norm to be seeing temperatures below freezing, maybe more so on how cold we are getting down into the low to middle 20s. We won't want to let our guard down moving forward. As you can see on the table over on the right-hand side, you can see the average date of last spring frost under the 50% column. For many across the state, this date doesn't occur until the second or third week of April. In addition, you can see the earlier and last frost dates for various locations across the state. Looking at the 90% and 10% columns, these mean that 90 or 10% of the time the last frost will occur after that date. So just in one example, I'm looking at Ashland at the top. 90% of the time, the last spring frost will occur after April 6th, and 10% of the time will occur after May 10th. So the average last frost occurs on April 24th in Ashland. Next slide. So lastly, I wanted to include this chart that I used in a couple other presentations earlier this year. Frost freeze normals, just like temperature and precipitation normals, are typically based on the average weather conditions over a 30-year period. The current normals are based on the years 1981 to 2010, but they will soon be updated to the 1991 to 2020 normals, updated every decade. I believe these are coming out next month. I could be wrong, but anyways, in this chart, I included the average last freeze dates for various locations across the state based on 3 different sets of normals: the 1971 to 2000 normals, the current normals of 1981 to 2010, and the projected new normals of 1991 through 2020, using data from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. In doing so, you see a distinct trend in these normals. Looking from left to right, you see the average last freeze occurring earlier in the year. Looking at Lexington, it was April 15th for the 71 to 2000 normals, but now is April 9th in those 91 to 2020 normals. Louisville, London, and Bowling Green also followed this trend of being about a week earlier. Keep in mind that this is an average over a 30-year period, but our warmer climate in recent years has led to our average last freeze occurring a little earlier in the year. So I also included a chart below showing freeze injury to wheat and what temperatures would cause damage at various development stages. While the main worry is fruit with this event, obviously nothing we can do with winter wheat out in the field. I talked to Dr. Carrie Knott. She's a grain crop specialist with UK, and there is some concern with winter wheat as some across the state has reached the joining stage. Looking at the chart, you can see the crop can see moderate to severe damage at this stage with temperatures of 24 degrees or below for 2 hours or more. So not just fruit, winter wheat's going to be also in that territory. But so that is what I have today. Outlooks hint at warmer and drier days ahead next week. The latest Kentucky monthly crop reports state that warmer conditions have had a positive impact on livestock conditions, something you definitely want to see. But with the excess rain we saw this month has created a muddy mess in pastures. So winter wheat remains in good condition also, but like I was just saying, will need to be reevaluated following this cold spell. The weekly crop reports from USDA NASS do start coming out next Monday if you're interested. But other than that, here's to hoping the weather cooperates and we can start planning in a couple of weeks. So send it back to you, Stu. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. Great job as always. And so, yeah, well, you gave a hint as to what's coming ahead. So let's move into the outlooks perspective. And we'll start with the 7-day quantitative precipitation forecast. And for the most part, it's going to be pretty dry here. It looks like there's a little bit of light green shading across Kentucky, but if you look at the legend there, we're talking about 1/10 of an inch or less of precipitation expected across the state. And not just Kentucky, but if you broaden out there, not a lot of moisture in the environment over the next 7 days. And as you mentioned, I don't think anyone is complaining about that at this point. 6 to 10 day outlooks on it temperature wise. Again, as Matt mentioned, we're going to be warming up over the next few days before we even get to that 6-day outlook. So the early part of next week, we'll have some spring-like temperatures. And the likelihood for the 6 to 10 day period from April 6th to the 10th, we have a strongly enhanced likelihood of above normal temperatures in the Central Plains and extending eastward through Kentucky, while precipitation, for the most part, about equal chances of being above or below normal there. Slightly elevated probability of wetter conditions in the northern part of the state there, but not a real strong signal precipitation-wise. And the confidence, becomes questionable when you see a sharp gradient there between the area where there's slightly above normal to our north, it's slightly below normal to our south. So we'll see how that plays out. On an 8 to 10 day perspective, we see a little bit of a change in the pattern from a strong ridging pattern in the east and associated trough in the west. That starts to flatten out a little bit. And so our temperatures on the 8 to 14 day outlook are focused in the normal category for Kentucky. And really kind of an interesting pattern there with likelihood of above normal around us to the north, south, and west. And then precipitation-wise, again, we're kind of on the cusp between an area where there's an enhanced likelihood of drier conditions and an enhanced likelihood of wetter conditions to our south and east. So no real strong patterns there that we can hang our hat on. And then for the month as a whole, and this was just updated yesterday, we are expecting an increased likelihood of above normal temperatures for the month of April throughout the state and most of the country, with the exception of the far western United States. And we have equal chances of above, near, or below normal precipitation. So we're expecting, as we'll mention here in a moment, expecting to see the La Nina pattern wane, and I think that's probably part of of what's factoring into the precipitation outlook there. So regarding the La Nina situation, as you know, we've been focused on that this winter. We've gone through a La Nina period, and we expect that to continue here for the March, April, May period. We're in the middle of that 3-month window right now. 59% chance of it continuing through this current period, and expecting to revert back to neutral once we get into the April, May, June period. That's the most likely scenario. So we expect La Nina to leave us as we go into the summer. But if you look at the graph on the lower right, you can see that there is an increasing chance of La Nina returning as we get into the fall season, but it's still not at all evident that that's actually what's going to happen. So La Nina should be leaving the picture here, at least for a while, within the next month or so. And if that happens, we'll take these graphics out of the picture here going forward. So here we're looking at the precipitation patterns in terms of La Nina, and in the upper right is the March, April, May graph, and you can really see that there's typically not much of an impact of La Nina on precipitation patterns in that March, April, May window. And if we look at temperature impacts, again, a good bit of variability, but all in all, we tend to be just a little bit cooler than normal during La Nina's March, April, May periods. But you can also see there on the left side in the blue shading, there's a cluster of years there where temperatures averaged about 57 to 58 degrees, a bit above normal. So still a fair amount of variability. The seasonal outlook for the period April, May, and June, basically the latter part of spring, above normal temperatures expected across most of the country. Again, this is kind of par for the course with the trending of warmer climate. And then on the right, we see a slightly elevated likelihood of above normal precipitation. But so far this year, we've continued to be wetter than normal. And we had a couple months there where we were drier than normal, but we continue to be in a very wet pattern here in Kentucky. We'll note the expectation of drier than normal conditions in the western U.S. in those areas where drought is currently present there. Monthly stream flow outlook from our friends at the Ohio River Forecast Center. Normal to above normal stream flows, depending on where you look there in Kentucky. Again, there's still a lot of moisture in the environment there. And the seasonal flood risk with the higher stream flows that we've seen, all the rain that we've had so far, there's still a bit of an elevated risk of flooding, at least minor flooding in some portions there, more so in there's the Green River Basin there and some on the Kentucky River Basin and such. And did not have an updated wildland fire potential map before this presentation was finalized here. So I plugged the one in from the beginning of March, which showed Kentucky to be in the normal category. But I expect that if you want to find the updated version, it has probably been released here over the last hour or two. So to summarize, we followed up a cold February with a warm March, and precipitation was highly variable across the state. Floodwaters receded following the heavy rains at the end of February, but soil moisture, shallow groundwater, stream flows generally remain elevated across the state. Following a brief cold snap, temperatures are expected to average above normal for April. Near-term dryness is expected with the transition of near normal precipitation for the month as a whole. And that forecast should be pretty promising for the agricultural sector here going forward. La Nina conditions are expected to ease. They'll likely return to neutral conditions by May. And the above normal precipitation totals that we've seen over the last 90 days have been broadly consistent with what we expect from a La Nina pattern, but not what we always get. So anyway, that kind of wraps it up for this month. And if you have a question, comment that you'd like to pass on or for us to address now, we'd be happy to take a moment here for those before we wrap up. So I'll give you a chance to do that. I was looking in the chat. I noticed a couple of comments earlier from Chip Zimmer and Steve Coleman about snow in Frankfort and Georgetown areas. So get out your skis and on the 1st of April. Well, if there are no questions or comments, you know, if you have some that come to mind, you're welcome to get a hold of Matt, myself, or either Bill or Chip at the Division of Water, and we'll be happy to try to address those. Again, I would encourage you to sign up and participate in our drought workshop next week. Otherwise, we'll look forward to seeing you next month. So I hope everyone has a very happy day, good day, and a good month here of April. Take care.